all of us are so forced to be on this internet and on the social media all the time, and it is pearls to swine. There are trolls that are just abound. They just don't, everybody is only there to make drama, right? Sometimes people just, it's so fun for them to cause chaos and like prey on insecurities, and they know that musicians are vulnerable to that, because you're literally writing, whether it's what you share on social media and like a post, or you share your music, and that too becomes that's a huge coping skill of mine. I'm sure you guys relate also, for that being a part of my therapy, right? So I have a therapist, but I also write, and that's my therapy. And so whether I'm putting out a post or I'm putting out music, it's like, this is personal to me, and people are just waiting to tear it apart.
Yeah, and it's tricky too, that making that choice is tricky. And again, not just as a musician or an artist, but even as a normal person. Like there's someone, I'll leave out their name, but just someone in my life who like makes it becomes this feeding cycle that actually has been a negative thing, that started as like, I'm going to divulge certain parts of myself to people, to, which at first is great, because you get this empathetic response with people that do care about you and do have your best interest in mind. But sometimes, because someone gets attention, it starts turning into this feeding cycle. And I've even noticed as an artist, like artists will double down on certain negative aspects of an experience or their personality or like whatever, because it worked, right? So it's like, and it's almost like the algorithm of the soul, just like in social media, we're like always following the algorithm. Well, that worked. The data's there. Let's keep doing that, right?
It's like empathy fishing.
Yes. And so I think it, in that journey of like, we're always putting things out there, and then something strikes a chord. I think as long as in our personal life, we still have like our vision set so far ahead that we're still like chasing greatness or some kind of really worthy goal, then we don't get stuck in this like little side mission that's like giving us this attention kick, because then you just start, I don't know, like I've just seen people double down on it, and it can turn into this weird negative thing, and then it becomes who they are, and then they're like, oh, I'm just the depressed person now. And it's like, are you, or was that just something you experienced,
Or exploited.
Or exploited? Yeah.
You're talking about the people that one up you, right? Like, or they have a story, and then so they pose it as though it's relatable, but in reality, it's because they're attention seeking.
Well, I thought he was talking about more like artists kind of making that their brand, kind of. Is that what you mean? I don't know.
Yeah. Like you can make it a bit, and I was saying not just artists. It's very relevant to us, but even people in other walks of life. You can, things that give you attention, are oftentimes like, because you get that attention, there's this feedback cycle, and your brain will seek that social connection. It's not always a positive thing. Like
my dog takes my son's socks all the time, like all the time, and he knows it's not good attention, but he also knows he's getting the attention, So
right.
You do the same thing,
and it become your brand, like you said, Doc. Like where you're like, and you have people around you that are reinforcing that, to go, like I was saying, that works. Like lean into that, and I don't know. It's just something to be like conscious of, I guess, or something I've had to like kind of.
Yeah, I think it's kind of fueled a percentage of like the amount of depression and anxiety we've seen in our culture. I think it's a bit exacerbated by the fact that it does garner a lot of attention, and then people make it part of their identity. And I've talked to Matt about this, where I'm like, man, I'm seeing this all the time. Like there's part of me that's just like, man, I want to come out and say like, we need to stop talking about it and start doing something about it, because everybody's talking about it. It's like, let's start making a change and put it in the past, because like, you are not your depression and anxiety. You weren't born in fear. You weren't born depressed and anxious. Like that's something that's attached itself to you. Get rid of it. Find a way to overcome, find a way to push through it. And obviously it's different for some people. Some people are just clinically depressed, but like, it's just becomes so prevalent in our society today. And I think part of it is exacerbated by what you're saying, Johnny.
Yeah. And understanding, I think the problem of like what actual depression is and what actual anxiety is. I think there's plenty of room for debate because I don't think any of us, know the extent of the human mind. I mean, it's so deep and wide and complex. But I think if there is this idea out there that you can't fix it and you can't make changes in your life that would ever affect it, like you said, once you've accepted it as a part of your identity, you're like, no, I'm just a depressed person. You kind of have boxed yourself in psychologically, and there's no room for growth out of that because you've kind of put yourself in a cage. But if you I went through this process in the last few years where I was unconscious of how many things in my life I had put walls around myself on. Like I had told myself so many times, like, that's just who I am, or that's never going to change. Because in all my experience, it never had, And I think when someone comes along, like the right person who maybe connects enough with your experience that tells you, no, like that's not a wall, that's a door. You just haven't opened it yet, there's hope, there are things you can change that have these effects on your mind state,
Absolutely. And it's very powerful, I think, what you're talking about too, because and maybe especially for guys as well, right? Because as you mentioned before, guys are not typically taught to have emotional awareness and like feel like they can tap into certain things about like that. But as musicians, maybe you're more conscious of this, but you realize with this awareness, right, which is half the battle, that you're falling into these negative cognitions, right? This helplessness, right? That says, I can't change this because it's just something that I've never been able to change. And so that must mean that it can't change. And that's not true, right? And so when you're talking about, getting a therapist or Danny, when you're saying like, do things to change this, right? Like number one thing for depression is like, get out and be active because it will change chemicals, brain chemicals, physiological change happens when you actively address things. And I love that. I think it's very empowering. I think it's a message that a lot of people need to hear. I totally agree with you that there is this maybe propensity to kind of like I don't want to say oversell, but it drives me nuts as a therapist when I see like on TikTok, people are like, oh, just my manic phase. I'm like, no, if you experience mania, you would be in a hospital right now. Like
My
clinical
sister had
mania.
Yeah, people joke about that stuff. I'm like, you haven't seen shit. Like I've seen some wild stuff like that's actual mania. Like she didn't sleep for days, was seeing demons like flying around me, like was like pale white, like it looks wild. Like
So to
way
everything
different.
that Johnny was talking about, when Danny's not the original singer, you guys know that, from Ashes to New. And when Danny came in the band, I was an absolute fucking wreck. My life was a mess because I had gone from this point in life where, I mean, I grew up poor. We had no money. Danny did too. That's kind of how we click on a lot of things, probably. I had nothing. I watched everyone get everything while I sat back wishing I had things. That turned into a life of crime, addiction. And then I was able to spin it, got into working out, get into clean eating, doing all these things, create this band. Things are starting to really kind of go the direction I want. And the next thing I know, because I made poor choices and didn't click with certain people, everything just unraveled. And when it all unraveled, I came crashing down. And I hadn't dealt with those things before in my life. I was raised to believe that anxiety and depression and all of those things are in your head. You create them and you can control them. So my thought process when that hit me was like, what the hell is this? I don't know what this is. I've never experienced anything like this before. Panic attack 5 times a day. Just things that I didn't know. Danny turned me on to like different ways of thinking. He turned me on to some books. He turned me on to manifestation, which if you would have offered that to a guy, the same guy a year or two prior, he would have been like, that's some bullshit. All right, whatever. You know what I mean? But I was desperate. I was at a point in my life where I was like, anything. It doesn't matter. I'm taking Zoloft. I'm taking Xanax. I need to figure out.
I will join a cult.
Yeah, dude, I'm telling you, I was like, bro, I need anything. Danny turned me on to these things and I started reading and I started going, holy shit, I've done that in the past. I've done this, didn't even know that I was doing this. Now I'm a firm believer that you can literally control everything around you. And the more that you believe that you can control, the more you can control it. So for example, like all of my shortcomings are because I believed that they would be shortcomings, and all of my wins have happened because I believed that that would happen. And a lot of the times it's not just necessarily believing, it's knowing, and it's subconsciously knowing. And as long as I can program my mind to then embed my subconscious, all those things come to fruition. So really it's been a massive roller coaster ride. Life is such an amazing thing. Like, Danny's always like, Mario wouldn't be any fun if it was just a straight map from start to finish, like all those pitfalls, ups and downs and jumps and turtles and all those things. Like that's what makes it incredible. So yeah, I mean, like I identify with like everything you guys are talking about, and I'm not surprised because we all are in bands and write music and tour, and it takes a special individual to be able to do those types of things.
So we're the right type of crazy to like have this conversation.
I think so.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it seems like, I don't know. I've never met Johnny before, but I feel like everyone in here seems like the right type of crazy. But I mean, there's also the other type of crazy that Johnny was talking about that exists out there as well. And a few of them as well.
So that's one of the things that came to mind when you were talking. That was like, I'm a firm believer that there's healing in the middle ground, right? So like, it's not going to work out great if I feel like I have to have an insane amount of control over every single thing that I do, because then I might start to really fall into like, obsessive compulsive type tendencies and disorders, right? And then, but there's other stuff that like, if you just learned helplessness, throw your hands in a corner and, just sleep on the floor for the rest of life and don't try because you don't feel that you can have any lasting effect in your life, that's also not going to be beneficial, right? So there's these, I think all of the, as you put it with Mario, right? And you get like the turtles and the different turns and everything else like that, like that's teaching us, if we can learn awareness and pay attention to where we're, going here, there's stuff to be learned. You can learn when you can just let your guard down a little bit. You can learn when you got to pick yourself up again. You can learn how to deal with things like anxiety, even if in the beginning it's these intense panic disorder where like I don't have control over that, right? But I talk to people about grounding, like what can we do in this moment when it feels so out of body and so uncomfortable and so otherworldly, right? I can like feel around on my pillow's very nice, and let me just feel how soft this is, and right, deep breathe, and like try to see if I can come back, right? And if I can't, maybe the next form is like escalate and help, right? You need to talk about these things, because if the person that you're living with, like your spouse or your family, is like aware, they can try to help you and notice when you need help, right? Like this is it's kind of why I love this conversation, because so many people are trying to figure, they're probably panicked and not knowing what to do and how to do things. And there's all kinds of different things that we can do. Conversations like this are helpful because it brings that awareness. Therapy is helpful.
Knowing is half of the madness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, it was half the madness, right? Because I think before I was part of the ignorance is bliss crowd. Like, I think that like, I was the sleep on the floor guy. Like, I didn't give a shit. All my friends were the sleep on the floor guys. Like, that's kind of what we did. So that ignorance was absolutely bliss. And then at one point in time in my life, I got shoved into this knowing circle. And all of a sudden I'm like, I know that is wrong with me. Like, I know that I am doing this. How do I stop doing that? And then that was half of the madness, because now I'm trying to figure out how to fix that shit. Rather than before, I didn't even realize it. Although it was destroying relationships and it was making my life a living hell, I didn't know that I was doing that. And then as soon as I started knowing that I was doing it, it was when it was like, oh shit, I am a terrible human. How do I become a better human being? And that was the start of my anxiety.
One thing I wanted to kind of point I want to make is that I think it's what you guys are talking about, which is very important, which is finding solutions for individuals to like kind of take a power and like go, I have some control here. I think it's also really important to talk about the big picture kind of sociological environment we're in, which is feeling insane in an insane world is very sane. And if you're a 25, 30-year-old person, just in your lifetime, you've experienced 9/11, financial crisis, COVID, you could look at every chart on mental health, everything that's screwed up. You have crisis of young people, boys and girls. Everything shoots up starting past 2010, which essentially the of social media and all the things that social media has exacerbated, right? Political,
Sorry, that's my bad.
racial divisions, sex and gender divisions, all this stuff that, you know, you can give someone some tools, but it doesn't mean it's not a wasteland. It's not Mad Max out there for
Yeah.
people. Like the environment. We're going to look back on this period, I think 20 years from now, in the same way how everyone was smoking and it was normal, as that, oh, we ingested this stuff through this screen for 20 years and we're all fucked up. It's like they didn't call it the Depression because everyone was in a good mood, right? Like if things are screwed up and people are screwed up because it is screwed up, that like we can go out there and we can have all these mechanisms as individuals, we can persevere through that. But it's important to acknowledge that the environment itself is toxic, right? Yes, we got to get a gas mask so you can breathe, but you know, there are big challenges. You know, this is
Johnny.
Gen Z is going to be the first generation to grow up poorer than their previous generation. People are rightfully bummed out about that. Sorry, Johnny. You go.
No. I didn't want to cut you off. I feel like it's great to like always think about both of those things, the zooming out, like the environment, you know, the state of the world, the state of the country, the state of your area, and then also zooming in, you know, like Matt said, to kind of like your personal power and like what you can do within that. But I mean, it's kind of like you're saying, like if you're at Chernobyl when the radioactive like fallout was occurring, no amount of self-help books are going to fix whether you're going to get radioactive poisoning or not, right? You just have to remove yourself from that environment. But I think bringing it back to the personal side is your form of control, in a sense, is what you do with that environment, where you position yourself, you know, because every generation has had their, you know, horrors and their challenges. And I would say, yeah, we seem to be like more in our head than probably people in the past, but humans have endured such cataclysmic like horrors that we couldn't even believe, like so much worse than anything we've ever gone through. And we've survived, you know, we're all survivors, you know, we're the offspring of like badasses in some form because they made it. And we are like, you know, like you said, this environment thing, just keeping that in mind, that you're feeling all these things not because you're inherently a problem or there's something wrong with you. Like you said, there's a lot of chaos going on, and there's a lot of sensory input that we're not really built for evolutionarily. So I'll just leave one thing I know we've been talking a while, but for me, I just wanted to put out there, like, what's really helped me personally is just the more I've studied, it's going to sound heady, but evolutionary biology, just kind of studying the roots to why we feel certain emotions at certain times and why they're triggered in certain ways. I feel like the creature that I am makes so much more sense, because the world we live in right now, the modern world, there are no clues as to why you feel the way you do, because everything around you has only been around for like not even 100 years in thousands and thousands and thousands of years of evolution. So like understanding our own roots really gives me a sense of peace, because I'm like, oh, that's why I'm feeling that, because this
I love that
instinctual thing was triggered. But we have a whole generation of people that have no clue and are not taught any of that. They're just like floating, like not knowing their genetic background.
No, you're totally right. And I got the 5-minute warning, so I don't know, they might cut us off. But you know, there is, thank you again for coming to the table and having this conversation. And I just, it helps my heart so much to hear all of this from you guys. But there are no bad parts. Our emotions are there for a reason. And you're not crazy, because have you seen it out there? It's crazy out there, right? So like, just I love that we're all able to kind of just empathize here, and I think it validated a lot for me. I hope it validates a lot for all of the people that are going to be watching this video, and I think what a great conversation. So I really appreciate you guys, and I guess we can wrap it up here. before Zoom cuts us off.
Yeah.
So
Hey, good to see
thank
all
you.
y'all again.
Good to see you
Yes.
guys. Thank
Awesome,
you
guys.
again. Much love. Take
I
care,
know
guys.
the homies were gonna be on here. This is
I didn't know who was going to be on here, man. I had no idea what I was getting into. This is great.
Totally feel it. Thank you guys so
Well,
much
good luck
again.
out there,
Take
y'all.
good care.
I'll see
Yeah.
y'all out there.
Yeah,
I
we'll
miss
see you guys
all
around.
you guys. I miss all of you.
I see you already.